First of all, thank you very much for the invitation. I think just to start out with an observation about the topic, because I think the topic assumes that there is a problem or a set of problems with political debate at the moment, which I think could potentially start as complaining right from the outset, without acknowledging the existing strengths that exist both in the political debate and the media debate in our country. And I think in this regard, it's extremely important to acknowledge the strengths that we have, especially the rude health that investigative journalism, or at least sections of investigative journalism, is in at the moment. So the fact that we know about the extent of corruption and mismanagement in various areas of the state, for instance, could be attributed to the very excellent work of investigative journalism outfits like the Amamugani Center for Investigative Journalism, Media 24 Investigations, and individuals such as Jacques Poe. So I think we would be doing them a disservice not to acknowledge their work at the outset. But now on to the problems. I think we could be forgiven for concluding that the screaming headlines that we see day in, day out create the impression that the most serious problem in the country that we face is state capture for corrupt purposes. And I think that this focus could lead us to conclude that the problem could be blamed on one man, and consequently it could be solved simply by removing one man. And I think that the slant in the political debate individualises the problem that we're experiencing as a country, and it can detract from a much more fundamental problem, which is inequality. I think this isn't to say that corruption and inequality are mutually exclusive. Obviously they're not, as corruption increases inequality. But even if state capture is currently understood with less of a problem, inequality is likely to remain as it is a consequence of how society is structured. And I think that structure, in turn, is a consequence of deliberate political choices. Now, the more fundamental debate we should be having is about the way our society is organized, the fact that it's unsustainable, and the fact that it must change. The narrowness of the debate is preventing us from seeing the full extent of the social crisis in our country. Now, in fact, I think I would even argue that South Africa has one major problem, and one only, and that is inequality. And every other problem is epiphenomenal. But because so much of the debate is elite-orientated and focused on the doings or misdoings of select political leaders, the losers of the current system, who are more likely to raise the systemic issues, remain largely excluded from the debate. And much of this, I think, has to do with which social forces are organized sufficiently to exercise social power. So one of the least well-organized constituencies, at least at national level, is the unemployed. The current economic consensus, or at least what appears to be the consensus, continues, I'd argue, only because the unemployed lack a significant organized national voice. And unfortunately, much of the political debate tends to reproduce and reinforce this silence. Now, much of the debate is also polarized into simplistic binaries. So you are either in the state capture camp or in the white monopoly capital camp. But the South African reality, I think, contains elements of both. Now, it's incontestable that poverty still continues to wear a black face largely, while wealth generated by a highly monopolized economy still continues to wear a white face. So white monopoly capital is an important, although not completely accurate, descriptor of the South African economy. At the same time, the current predatory elite are worsening the problem. But there is no such thing as clean capitalism. Cronyism is endemic to the system, and the polarized debate also fails to capture that reality. So I think a sophisticated analysis should be capable of capturing the descriptive power of both concepts. Now, because the debate is skewed towards the undoubtedly very serious problem of state capture and the conduct of one individual, there is very little serious debate on political alternatives. What debate there is is focused on changing leaders in the ANC. Hence the massive focus on the December conference and the factions vying for the control of the party. Nowhere is the paucity of debate more evident, though, than in relation to the economy. This is reflected in the fact that what passes for economics journalism has actually been reduced to business journalism. In other words, business interests get to define the normative view about economics. Now take the case of the EFF, for instance. Their coverage became much more positive in the run-up to the 2014 elections, but mainly because the party offered a spectacle that provided much-needed media drama. This links to a broader problem that so much election coverage is event-focused, not policy-focused. Yet the EFF's attempts to shift the debate on the state of the economy through proposals for instance, selective nationalisation, were often met with the guffaws of derision. There appears to be an unspoken consensus, especially in the business media, but in party political debate too, that assumes that all reasonable, practical, workable solutions to South Africa's problems must converge on the neoliberal model, which has been shown over and over again to be prone to crisis and hence to be unsustainable. Political debate, including media debate, remains dominated by the political centre. The fact that much of the media subscribe to the professional model of journalism tends to hide these systemic biases. Now, any debate that raises the problems of capitalism are immediately branded as being unrealistic. In this regard, there's a fundamental mismatch between the ideas that circulate in broader society and in popular politics, and the ideas that circulate in much of the media. Socialism still remains a popular idea in mass politics. Hence, some of the most significant realignments that have taken place in mass politics since the Marikana massacre are inspired by anti-capitalism or socialism. Yet these ideas continue to be sniggered at in polite society. Until and unless the politics of mass organizations are taken seriously, then we do not have the basis for a true political debate that puts all the political options on the table and subjects them to rigorous scrutiny. This lack of debate can also lead to ludicrous outcomes, where ill-considered positions are taken. The support by sections of the left in supporting Robert Mugabe, for instance, in spite of the fact that the broad mass of Zimbabweans reject his leadership, is a case in point. The tendency to counterpose the current neoliberal order with crude anti-imperialism that glorifies despots is insulting to those Zimbabweans who rose up against Mugabe and takes us nowhere. There's also a tendency to assume that only political and especially parliamentary parties make politics. And the correct platform for these politics are parliament, governments, party congresses, and campaign trails. But politics are made in many other places in our society. And unless ways are found to reflect the true diversity of political debate in our country, the media and public commentary will continue to be at odds with broader society. So one of the arenas where popular politics are made, namely protest action, becomes of media interest only when protests descend into riots and buildings are burnt down. As a result, some protesters have been known to engage in disorderly conduct simply in order to attract media attention. I remember being told by a protest leader in Tibelihle once that they were planning a protest and they informed the media. One journalist phoned him and asked him if they were planning a disruptive or violent protest. He said no, as the community had learned that such protests can create more problems than they solve, and that as a result, they had committed themselves to peaceful protest. Apparently, the journalist told him that if that was the case, then he wouldn't attend and cover the protest. So if this kind of focus on riot porn that creates a disconnect between the media and popular politics and prevents us from tapping into all the areas of society where politics are made, and if we do so, then perhaps we can begin to have an inclusive public debate about the problems that face us and the best possible solutions. Thank you.